Welcome to chapter 35. News has been put out that Otho has met his end, but maybe that fake news was put about by Othonians wanting to lure Galba out of the palace where he's holed up. As word spreads, this is the reaction of the crowd outside. A crowd of people, of plebs, of equites, of senators. But before I start properly, let's notice this. Let's notice that the first sentence is enormous. It's a tidal wave of a sentence. Going down to line 8, the result of all this pandemonium, which builds irresistibly to Galba leaving the palace, is that, ironically, the tidal wave of people and their protestations of support result in the embarrassing irony that Galba, for all his efforts to want to leave the palace now, can't do because of this mass of people. So the upshot of all this is that Galba, as ever, loses face and is further discomforted by his own ineptitude, his own embarrassing senility, which means he can't fight his way out. And this is in stark contrast to how it was described as a heroic gesture in fine Roman fashion to go down fighting. Anyway, let's look at the Latin. Tum vero non populus tantum et imperita plebs. I've got to focus on this word. Not only the people, and the imperita plebs. And the plebs, imperita is the opposite of the word expert, which means that you share thoroughly in the knowledge of something if you're an expert. The plebs are here imperita, irrelevant, I think is the best way to translate this word. They may believe they're relevant, but they are just sadly irrelevant. The populace, that's a respectful word, of course, SPQR, senatus populusque Romanus, whereas plebs is not at all pleasant. They are reluctantly, not on their part, but on the part of people like Tacitus, somehow part of the makeup of the Roman state. But of course, they are utterly irrelevant. That doesn't stop them getting in the way, of course, or thinking that they are relevant and have some contribution to make. And maybe ordinary people, the ordinary people of Rome, the populace, and the awful elements, the plebs, maybe they could be forgiven for bursting into, I didn't mean to do that, applause and immodest enthusiasm. The textbook suggests that ruere in plausus is what Tacitus intended. And ruere, in plausus ruere, they burst into applause, and then they burst into the palace. I'm not convinced by that. They want ruere to be an example of something called silepsis, where a verb with two different meanings has both of those meanings used to the full. I suspect that zeugma is also a part of what may have been intended by Tacitus here. But I'm going to say I don't think it's necessary to kowtow to that explanation. I think there's no need for a verb. Tacitus often leaves out verbs, and you can simply say they applauded and showed immodest enthusiasm. There was applause and immodest enthusiasm, not only on the part of the people and the irrelevant plebeians, but also the majority of the equites and the senators. Lacking caution, because they had set aside their fear. Their fears had been allayed. Otho was dead, and so that emboldened them. All these people then, ruere, ostentare, scire, adfirmare. All these are examples of historic infinitives. They're usually used in groups of at least three, and it's usually within fast-moving narrative. The arch exponent of this was Julius Caesar in battle scenes, and because of the hurly-burly of this sentence and events, they're most appropriate here. So ruere is not what's intended there. It's not a poetic variant of ruerunt. These are historic infinitives. Anyway, it's entirely up to you, us, how we translate ruere, whether we want it to have this sort of double function of being the verb for in plausus, etymodica studia, and then also literally rushing into the palace. So, all these people, refractis palitii foribus, with the doors of the palace smashed in. Refractis, broken back. I suppose they, with the weight of the press of people, they force the doors back, re fractis. But whatever the exact implications of the word, there's no doubt that those saying the palace was not a defensible position, have been proved right. These are the friends, in inverted commas, of course, there's no sincerity anywhere in Rome. These are the supporters of Galba, and even the supporters have managed to smash their way in. So what would people of ill intent have been able to do? So those that suggested the palace could be a safe haven are proved wrong. So intus ruere They rushed in, having smashed open the doors of the palace, and they showed themselves to Galba. Look at me, look at me. Ostentare is not only a historic infinitive, it is also a frequentative verb in the historic infinitive. Ostendo is I show. Ostentare means they kept showing themselves to Galba. Why do they have to do this? Because they want to prove to Galba, who has the power of life or death over them as emperor, they want to show their loyalty. So they are sticking their faces in front of Galba so that he can see the loyal ones amongst them. Querentes, complaining that, so you've got an accusative infinitive, but there's no infinitive. Complaining that vengeance had been stolen from them, had been taken from them, prae reptam, had been taken from them in advance of their exacting vengeance. They've been robbed of the chance of taking vengeance on Otho and his terrible supporters. It's all utterly insincere, and Tacitus is quick to point this out. Ignavissimus quisque, each one of them an utter scoundrel. And, ut res docuit, as events revealed, known ausaurus, not, and that's a future participle, not in any way able to show their daring in periculo, in the event of real danger. So, of course, now that they feel it's safe to protest their support for Galba, they say all sorts of things that the reality, that the reverse situation would have demonstrated to be utterly insincere. Don't forget, when translating Tacitus, you have to put full stops. You have to break this down. We can't keep it as a tidal wave of an English sentence. Excessive in their words. Ferocious in their language. Nice chiasmus there. Nimi feroces, the two adjectives, and then the two nouns on the inside. A bit of variatio, because verbis is in the ablative, linguae is in the genitive. And I think it's fair to say that that is all part of this wonderful tricolon. Nimii verbis linguae feroces nemo scira et omnes ad firmara. Whether we... I've just noticed this semicolon, and some would say perhaps then, punctuating it like that, that this isn't a tricolon. But I think it is, because nimii verbis linguae feroces nemo, the nimi and the nemo, I think, are intended to go closely together. I've got to pause now because I've reached 15 minutes unforgivably. So I'll have to do a part 2.